start. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to have so many faces on the screen. It's a really important subject, and it's clearly touched a lot of people because we had a big response to this subject of, how should we be funding women-led, women-focused organizations? And I think we're all struggling with the same thing. But the most important thing is that Amisa, who we're trying to capture, is actually running such an organization. And we felt it was essential to hear from the ground, what are the barriers, what are the difficulties in getting funding for these organizations. So we're extremely lucky to have Katarina from Oak Foundation, and everybody's bios. I'm not going through bios. I'm just saying Katarina from Oak Foundation, who is a director of the issues facing affecting women, and who will be moderating for us. And we love having Katarina because she's always challenging, she's always controversial, and she's always got the right notes. So it's always fun having Katarina as a moderator. And we're very grateful for Danny from Oxfam, the director of Oxfam, and Muriel, who runs a philanthropy for Quartier Philanthropy. Amisa, we are trying to capture her somewhere in Kenya, runs and has founded a very, very effective organization, which is giving access for mental health to women in the Canberra slum. And she does it in a very interesting and innovative way. And she's a project that Giving Women is working with, and it's been a real honor for me to work with her directly. So welcome, everybody. Lots of wonderful faces, old friends. Hello, Helen. How nice to see you. And Elena, and lots of, really, it's great. Thank you for joining us. And Kelsey down there. Yeah, thank you. So I pass it on to Katarina now.
Hi, everybody. As Talanti said, fantastic to see you all on the screen. I can't see all of you. So if you have things that you want to share with us, questions, comments, please put them in the chat, and I'm going to rely on the remarkable Kathleen to help us see you, or put your hands up and wave. I don't know. We're going to manage this the best we can. We're actually down to 2 panelists from 4. So that gives you a lot of space to ask questions, be challenging, and to hear from you. And as Atalanti said, we're very excited that there are people on the call from Berlin, London, Oxford, Bern, Zurich, Geneva, The Hague, all sorts of places. So it's thrilling that really this is a way that we can come together. And I do want to just quickly point out, if we are going to talk about the challenges of joining, of accessing resources from international funders, I think poor old Amisa is actually living one of those challenges right now. The things that we don't take into account when we're thinking about how do we support organizations to access our partnership as funders. So I think that this is actually a great way to start in many ways, not for Amisa, because it's really illustrative of what some of those challenges are. I do also want to situate today's conversation in the current context of the multiple and intersecting crises that the world is living through. I looked it up this morning. Apparently there are currently, according to the Geneva Academy, there are 110 live armed conflicts across the globe today, which seems like a terrifying place to be. And I really think that many of the organizations that we're talking about are living or working in violent conflicts. They're dealing with the aftermath of destructive natural disasters, unrelenting climate crisis, and in some cases, a mixture of all of those. So amidst all of that, what are the sources of hope? Well, as Atalanti pointed out, I am lucky enough to work for women's rights organizations all over the world as a funding partner. And for me, that's where I see hope and possibility. And so I'm always eager to read reports such as these about women's rights organisations and what we can do to uplift them and to share our enthusiasm for their work in more practical ways that allow them to operate and to create the change that they're seeking. So welcome everybody. Atalanti, is Amisa with us now?
Amisa's just joining. She's
Okay.
just joining because she was trying to get connectivity.
Okay,
so
great.
she will be here.
Yeah.
We will see her.
Okay, great. So Amisa has to stand on the roof and hold her phone up and, you know, like lean out. So we're giving her a bit of space to do all
Kathleen,
of that.
will you tell us when Amisa is online?
I will do for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
She's just trying to get connected right now. So.
Yes. And in addition to Amisa's technical challenges, unfortunately, Olivia from Co-Impact can't join us today. But as I said, that leaves us a lot of space for conversation and discussion. So I'm very excited about that. So I'm really thrilled that Danny and Muriel are here with us. And I'm going to start off by asking Danny to talk to us, because this report that I'm hoping you've all had a look at was actually commissioned by Oxfam. It's from 2019, so it's not completely current, but I think the ideas and the values and the goals remain pretty much the same. I think, Danny, everybody knows who Oxfam is, so I'm not going to ask you to talk to us about that. I read recently, and I told Danny this recently, that after McDonald's and Coca-Cola in the UK, Oxfam is the most recognisable symbol to anybody, which I find quite remarkable and speaks to the work of Oxfam. But maybe, Danny, you could start by just telling us, why is this report important?
Right. Amisa should be just joining us now.
Okay, we'll welcome her in a second.
1 second, she came. Amisa? Amisa?
Yes, there she is. Hi, Amisa. We see you. Great.
Okay. So she's right.
Amisa, we're just starting with asking Danny to talk to us about why this report is important for Oxfam, just to catch you up. So Danny, over to you. Sorry.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Katerina. Hello, everyone. It's great to be part of this conversation, which feels, for me, really timely, and I'll explain why in a bit. Katerina, you said I shouldn't talk about. Everyone will know about the origins of Oxfam, but you've tempted me, and I'm going to take the bait, because I think, you know, there are, like all of these organizations, we have lots of different origin stories. The one that is relevant perhaps for this conversation is Oxfam was founded in the darkness of the Second World War by people who believed in shared humanity, people who believed that even in times of war, it's important to protect innocent civilians and stand up for humanitarian principles. And, you know, as you say, Katerina, we've grown and grown. You know, in Great Britain, I work for Oxfam GB. We're 81 years old. We're one of the biggest charities in the country, raising about £400 million of income. And the reason I want to talk about that history is when you read the sort of history books, and there have been several of them written about Oxfam, what's also telling is that fundamental to Oxfam's vision has been this notion of equality, particularly gender equality. And I say that because, you know, one of our very first grants that Oxfam made was to a women's technical college in Greece after an earthquake in the Ionian Islands in the early 1950s. And so this was a volunteer committee in Oxford, which has been set up for famine relief, identifying that in the recovery from the earthquake, they wanted to support women and girls getting into engineering and building resilience, I suppose we'd call it now. And ever since then, there's always been this sort of golden thread around supporting and nurturing women's rights and pursuing gender justice in Oxfam's work, right up until, you know, by the mid-1980s, Oxfam had created a gender and development unit, which apparently was one of the first in a big international NGO. In the 1990s, Oxfam got into trouble because we apparently published in the UK a gender right justice handbook, and sections of the right-wing press in the UK apparently accused Oxfam of being all women's lib and saying, why does a poverty organization want to get into supporting women's rights? And then in the last sort of 10 years or so, Oxfam's had an explicit commitment, like many international NGOs, to fund women's rights as a standalone commitment. So not in addition to mainstreaming gender justice, our commitment was 15% of our programmable resource was supposed to go to standalone programming in women's rights and gender justice. And when I started at Oxfam 5 years ago, one of the things my predecessor said was, look, we've made this pledge, but we're not meeting it. And so the report, Leap of Faith, although it's a few years old, was really instrumental in a sort of wake-up call, I suppose, for Oxfam to say, well, we've been talking about gender equality for a long time. We've been making some pledges, including a public one, but not really supporting women's rights organizations or women's-led organizations, both in a sort of, in meeting our numerical targets. But I think when we looked around and talked to some of our partners, including through this report, it turned out that they also felt it wasn't just the money wasn't getting through, but the power relationships were themselves unequal. That we were often seen as a sort of an organization, if you read the report, that has inflexible funding. We had heavily conditional funding, that it was also short-term, it would projectized funding. And so we weren't meeting our numerical targets, and we were getting feedback from our very partners, the very partners we want to support, that actually we were in some ways part of the problem. And so the report was super important for us because it was about saying, how do we change and learn and get better at supporting the very organizations that we want to support? And we've learned some lessons. I'm happy to talk about that in a bit, but I wanted to close by saying that there's a phrase that my former colleague Fenella Porter, who some of you may remember was our gender justice director for many years, and Fenella said, the biggest danger for the likes of Oxfam is that we end up dad dancing. I don't know if that's a phrase that travels across languages, but dad dancing is when sort of, the older dad turns up on the dance floor and thinks that they know all the latest moves and end up embarrassing themselves. And Fenella used to say, that's the danger for big NGOs, because it's not like any of this is particularly new. There have been women's rights funds for decades. There have been specialists who've been working on core funding and flexible funding for women's organizations for years. And so for an INGO to sort of turn around in the, a couple of decades into the 21st century and say, oh, we've just discovered that this is how we're going to work, was a challenge. And so, it has been a new approach, but we're doing it acknowledging that in some ways there is a risk that we end up dad dancing, but I think we can add value. And let me pause there. I'm sure we can come to some of the other lessons we're learning as we're changing our approach. Over for now.
I'm going to keep doing that. Thanks, Danny. I love the analogy of the dad dancing. And it came up when I first mentioned to Danny that, in fact, this report doesn't exactly that. It doesn't say anything new. And probably all of you on the call, when you read the report, thought, oh, yeah, that resonates, because I've heard that before and I've thought that before. But it's always helpful when a bloke says it. I don't know if that's been your experience too, but oftentimes great ideas come out of all sorts of places, and it's not till a bloke says it or it's written down that all of a sudden it becomes orthodoxy. So it's actually useful. That is an added value when an organisation like Oxfam, with that level of recognition, is able to say, yeah, you know what, this is what we think too. This is how we want to operate as well. I'm going to go to Muriel, if that's okay now. When we talked earlier, you mentioned that the report raised a couple of points where you think actually foundations have a more active role to play and could take more concrete action. Muriel, could you just start with one sentence about Cartier Foundation, just in case people don't know you very well, and then maybe talk to us about some of the ways that you think foundations can play a more active role and take more concrete action. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Katerina, and thanks to all of you for being with us today. We hope it's going to be an inspiring and very lively discussion. So in a nutshell, Cartier Philanthropy, we are the corporate arm of Cartier, the company, but we're an independent foundation based here in Geneva. We are a grant-making foundation focusing on improving the life of the most vulnerable. Women, of course, being at the center of most of the organizations we fund. And yes, thanks, Katerina, and thanks, Danny, also for introducing us to the report. I think there's 2 points I would like to elaborate on. The first is building trust. We hear that a lot, and I'd love to hear also Amisa's perspective on what does it mean to build trust. We hear that a lot, but as a funder, I think we have a key responsibility and a key role to play on that. So what do we mean by trust? Trust for me, it's neither the blind trust, where we would tend to delegate thinking and decision-making completely, but it's now mistrust, where the tendency would be to retain the control. For me, trust is really recognizing the power to give power. And to do that, there's a couple of very concrete action that I think funders and foundation need. The first, and it's key for us in all the partnership relations we have, it's to recognize that the organization we support are the experts. They have the expertise. They are, and when we were preparing the discussion with Katerina, I used the word, they are the superhero. They are acting in extremely challenging context. So they have the expertise, and we as Grant Making Foundation, we're here to support them. And how can we best support those organizations? First, I think one of the key concrete action is to provide a multi-year and unrestricted funding as much as we can. It's extremely important to give the flexibility to the organization and also the long-term perspective. We usually engage at least for 3 years. We have organizations we've been supporting for 10 years, and that's how we want to build that network of partners. Then I think it's very important also to be transparent about expectation, about the ambitions, about the challenges that an organization may face. It's really to have that dialogue between the two entities to ensure that we can really understand the organization we support, but also that the organization understand where we are, how we want to work, spend some time together to really ensure that deep understanding. To do that as well, I think funders should conduct comprehensive due diligence, but the idea is really to reduce the burden from the partners. In our team, we do our due diligence internally. We try really to engage with the partner, but without putting the burden on them. Then I think also flexibility is key, and one of our partner from Mothers to Mothers talked about a room to grow. The importance also to understand that the organization implementing program on the ground need to adjust, need to fine-tune their intervention, and to be here as well when we have this growth phase. And finally, there's an important point, I think, is to really provide assistance beyond the grant, non-monetary support to organization. That's also about building trust. How can I open doors for an organization, which I believe is doing an amazing job? How can I provide access to consultants in M&E or behavior change strategy? It's really to see what kind of role a funder can play to be a responsible funder and to allow this, room for trust. So it's a journey. We are still learning. We're also working with a board to strengthen that, but that's really how we would like to see foundations play a more concrete role in that. Thanks, Katerina.
Thanks, Muriel. That was really useful. I want to, before I come to you, Amisa, I just want to go back to Danny quickly, because Mira, you raised the issue of power, and that's a theme that goes right through the report, this constant return to the power imbalance between funders and and partners that do the actual work on the ground. When I started 10 years ago at Oak, the trustee of the foundation said to me, you've never been so beautiful, so funny, so clever, or so brilliant as you are now that you work for a foundation, because everywhere you go, that's how people are going to try to make you feel. But it's not true, which was kind of disappointing since you just offered me a job and I was kind of thinking maybe I'd cracked it finally. But it's just not true. It's a really difficult power dynamic in which people feel the need to agree to everything that you say, laugh at every joke you make, and not point out when you're the dad dancer. And so I'm going to just want to come back to you, Danny, to ask, so what is Oxfam, how does it understand that position of power? And how does it partner, particularly with frontline organisations led by women, who may have even less power in their societies? How do you work with that power imbalance? To bring about a partnership.
Well, Katerina, just to say, I mean, you are as glamorous and as funny as you were when I first met you. You haven't aged a bit. So I think, you know, it is really, really important for each of us to interrogate and challenge the power we hold. And you're right. I mean, being an international NGO, we have 3,500 partner organizations we work with around the world. Almost all of them are much, much smaller than we are and rely to a lesser or larger extent on funding from the likes of us. So, you know, in some ways, although we're a big international NGO, we more like a grant maker in some of the contexts that we work with. And I think what we're learning is it's important to be explicit and understand and recognize the power that we hold, and then to sort of lean into trying to disrupt that power and to say, and be almost sort of systemic about it. You know, one of the lessons that Oxfam learned after our failings on safeguarding in Haiti a few years ago is that it's not good enough just to have policies and processes in place to reduce or minimize the abuse of power. I think you've got to sort of lean into it and really think through how do you challenge that power. And for us, that's, you know, the sort of a practical shift is to say, instead of subcontracting our partner organizations, particularly women's rights organizations, we try to treat them like genuine long-term partners. Again, as Muriel said, long-term funding. So that our women's rights fund that we've been piloting in Kenya and in Palestine involves 3-year core funding for women's rights organizations, and we're trying to roll that out in other parts of the world. And you know, just trying to own up to to be explicit about those sort of power imbalances, but also thinking about how power does work. You know, as you said, Oxfam has huge brand recognition. We're able to open doors. We have a global advocacy machine. And so we have to also recognize we hold some types of power. And the question for us is, how do we share that power? So, you know, with our local partners, it's not just about sort of shifting power and resources through the sort of granting behaviors. It's about saying, what power do we hold and how do we share that more equitably and more? And ultimately, and this is a sort of personal reflection, I suppose, that after 5 years of working here, is I call it the My People test. And I call it the My People test because a few years ago, I spent a day with the chief executive of a very large multinational company. And he kept going on and on about how he cares for his people. And I said, who do you mean? And he said, well, you know, the 60,000 people that work for my company. And I said, but you've got a supply chain that runs into hundreds of thousands of others, often in, you know, contractors who only work for your company, right? And they are garment workers or food pickers or tea pluckers in different parts of the world who are effectively, you know, supplying only to you. Do you not think about them as your people? And he said, no, they're not my people. And we had a long conversation about how come? Because why is it that if you happen to work for that organization employee, you're considered to be part of the family? But if you happen to be you know, effectively 100%, you know, subsidiary or of your company or not. And I call it the My People test because I think in some ways, whether you're an INGO or a grant maker, the test for us all should be, do we consider those partners we work with to be my people or our people? Do we care for them and think about them and include them and their voice in the ways that we might with our partners? Not in every, I'm not being idealistic and naive and say that every aspect, but in more as much of life, of organizational life. And I want to just close with this, which is, I probably should have begun with this, because for me, I thought about that the other day because of what's happening in Israel and Palestine. As I said, we work with women's rights organizations in Palestine, and I had the privilege of spending some time in Gaza a few months ago with two of those amazing organizations, Aid and Hope and WEFAC. Brilliant, brave activists who are doing amazing, important work, but whose lives have been turned upside down in recent weeks. You know, these are people who should be running relief services and community services, but they're running for their lives. And I know at least one colleague from Aid and Hope who's lost her home through a bomb. And I felt, and we know Oxfam also has 30-odd colleagues who are sadly in Gaza at the moment and caught up with all it. So they're 30-odd Oxfam employees. But when I reflected about my time in Gaza, I found myself not differentiating the care that I had for my colleagues and the partner organizations I work for. And I thought that was, for me, a realization that it sort of, you know, and it was only through connecting, meeting, supporting, getting to know, having them visit the UK, you know, the exchange and interaction. All of a sudden, that boundary between Oxfam employee and partner organization starts to blur, at least in my head. And maybe that's a test that we could apply to you know, all of us who work in philanthropy or social justice. Let me stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. A lot to think about, and so much I want to ask you now, Amisa, but I'm going to try and do it in an orderly fashion. Otherwise, our brains are going to explode with all the ideas that Danny and Muriel have just brought up for us. But Amisa, one of your great talents, I've only met you once, but I was so impressed by the wonderful way with which you introduced yourself and your organization. So can I ask you, for the benefit of the participants who don't know you and don't know your organization, can you just briefly talk to us about you and what motivates you to do this work, and a little bit about your organization? And I just lost her. Did I? Kathleen, did we lose Amisa?
I'm just checking because she was there up until a second ago.
Until I said those magic words, Amisa.
Yeah, 1 second. And where is she? Yeah,
No?
lost her. So okay.
Okay. I'm going to leave you to try and help bring her back through the magic of technology. And while you do that, I'm going to go back to some questions for Muriel and Danny. And maybe are there others of you on the line? I do know that a few of you do work for frontline organizations. Jackie works for Women Challenge to Challenge in Kenya, and I think there are a few others of you on the line. So if you want to jump in with your thoughts at any time, please wave your arms frantically and one of us hopefully will see you, or put your hand up or put a message in the chat. Muriel, Danny talked about power, and that really, a few things really resonated with me about disrupting power systematically, and about sharing power. From your perspective at Cartier, how are you doing that? I mean, you talked about the core flexible long-term funding, and I think as funders, we've been asked for that for a really long time. And you and the foundation I work for and Oxfam, we do all of those things now. But what's the next frontier for power sharing or power building? What else should we be doing as foundations, do you think?
Yes, thank you, Katarina. No, I think it's the power imbalance is a very important discussion. We have to acknowledge it first. I mean, what we know, I was doing some my homework before, joining this panel, and the hashtag Shift the Power, it actually started to establish itself in 2016, like 7 years ago. So it's not a new topic. It's really something that is kind of inherent to the philanthropic system, and that we need to recognize and we need to overtune. So then for me, some of the concrete action, the recognition is fundamental, and also recognizing that for me, our work as funder is about work that change and not charity. It's a change of paradigm, and we need, if we want to collectively alleviate power imbalance, we need to have the trust that I mentioned, and what can we concretely do to build trust, the dialogue, the relationship building, and it has to translate actually in our practices with our grantees. At the foundation level, a couple of tangible action, I think, as well, create more diverse boards and teams. Our board has welcomed 3 new members recently, and the idea is also to have some different perspective on the work we do. It's the same with teams, to really ensure that we embed different perspective and that we accept also to be a challenge. I mean, we really have a fruitful and interesting discussion as team, and I think it's super important, and also to really have that kind of dialogue within funders and with our grantees, to really listen to what they need, to what is working well, what's not working well, and maybe the next step is really to see how we can co-design solution, how we can really understand the needs. I mean, we cannot be experts on each and every topics, in each and every context, so we have to be extremely humble about that. So how can we really create that space to co-design solutions? I think that's also an important part. We're still learning, and we also try with our portfolio of partners. I saw some in the room today, so they're most welcome also to share what the needs are. We really try to adjust if there's some need for, as I mentioned, non-monetary support, for connection. How can we play that role? But yeah, humility, I think, is key. Recognition of power imbalance, and not being afraid to be challenged. I don't know if oh, Amisha is back, I think. So maybe I pause here, but I'll be happy also to talk more about the impact measurement and what does it mean when you have that power dimension in mind. But maybe, Amisha, it's maybe your turn. Thanks.
Thanks, Muriel. Amisa, are you there? Are you staying off camera?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, great. Okay, if it helps to stay off camera, that's fine. We understand. But so can I go back to you with my earlier question before we lost you? Just please, if you can introduce yourself, tell us about how you came to this work and a little bit about the organization. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. In Nairobi, it's afternoon, so I'm hoping it's also afternoon where you are. My name is Amisa from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm the founder and executive director of Nivishe Foundation. Nivishe, Nivishe Foundation is a Swahili word. So Nivishe basically means to cover you. And it is, we don't offer you clothing, but basically we offer you dignity by covering you through accessing affordable, accessible, and cultural sensitive mental health services at the community levels. And we work mainly with youth and girls at the community levels. I personally come from the ethnically marginalized Nubian community in Kenya, and that is why my work is centered towards supporting marginalized community, vulnerable communities, because I have lived experience of what happens when resources and a lot of support is not given to individuals who come from these communities and work for this community. With Nivishe Foundation, we are part of the Giving Women community, which we are so happy to be here. And I'm also glad to be part of the conversation. So basically, Katharina, it was about introducing myself first, or should I go on?
No, that's fine. You can continue if you want to tell a little bit more, or do you about the organization, or do you feel comfortable we can move on to the question?
So I can share one or two things when you're talking about, which is very relevant to our conversation. One thing that we do around Nivishe is mental health. And I know most of us, we are actually finishing October, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. And everybody has been talking about mental health. But I'm just wondering, are there any, especially for organizations who are funders, are there intentionality in supporting mental health organization? Because we find that all issues are surrounding women, like gender-based violence, like climate change, like all those kind of things are related to mental health, but there is lack of support to mental health. And that is what has actually made us stick to the journey of mental health, because there's a huge gap. Everybody is talking about mental health, but there's no action towards supporting mental health initiative, especially at the grassroots levels. So with Nivishe Foundation, we work with different community aspects. So one, I'll share one or two. So we have mental health and psychosocial support for teen mothers, whereby we work with teen mothers who have dropped out of schools to be able to get mental health and psychosocial support, which is cultural sensitive, and be able to continue with their work. And also we have several programs, but the key thing that I wanted to highlight was more of the cultural sensitivity and the word decolonization, because for Nivishe Foundation, it is the bridge. What we do is the bridge between the conventional Western approach of mental health and the community-based mental health approaches. So how can we bridge in the two without forgetting the scientific research and the community research? And that calls for decolonization, and that calls for localization. And we are talking about decolonization and localization. I'm not talking about just for the programmatic areas that we are doing to Nivishe to fit our community, but we are also talking about it with the larger community that are supporting our work. How can you work with us to decolonize or localize our community projects so that it can specifically support our community without the influence that you have, let's say, as a funder on your expectations towards what we are doing at the community level. So that is one key component that we are really working on, and trying to figure out how we can continue being sustainable, but at the same time being cultural sensitive, which is a thin line to cross. Back to you, Katharina.
Okay, I had a whole series of questions and they're all just going out the window, but just because of that. So Muriel and Danny, you're just going to have to bear with me because that was really brilliant. And what you described, Amisa, to me, living in a multilingual country is a form of translation. What you're asking is, how can we translate the truth of what we see, the truth of what's needed here, into language that funders, who are largely northern-based often, can hear and understand? Because one of the things that isn't mentioned in the report, I think, is funders are often, not always, but often rather homogenous. We often come from the north. We might look like Danny and me, but we come, our paradigm that we work in is very northern, very European. And people like Danny and me learn to speak and hear the language of the West that is not often the same language spoken and understood by the frontline activists. So, Amisa, tell us, what do you think, if we're serious about sharing power or understanding power differently, what do we as funders need to do differently so that our ears are open, so that we hear the language of the truth and the reality on the ground, rather than trying to talk at you and explain to you what we want? What do we need to do differently?
Thank you, Katharina. So I love the aspect that you mentioned, the necessity for funders to be able to hear and find solution. But it's one thing that I usually say, it goes more to hearing, because we can come to this conversation, for instance, and we hear what needs to be done, But hearing is just hearing. It does not translate to action. But what I usually call for is listening. Listening comes with being actively involved to know that when there's that specificity between hearing and between listening. Listening does not even have a language, because I can sit with an animal, let's say my dog, and I can feel that they're listening to me, right? So we've exchanged some sort of connectivity. So that is what I'm saying. So now, instead of just hearing, this is what is needed, how can we go down to listening? And with listening comes with intentionality and accountability, because once I've listened to what you are telling me, how can I be able to support you, or how can I be able to work together? And if we are not able to do it, how can we hold each other accountable in both aspects, whether it is the grantees or the donor or the fund organization? So it's more about how can we, and when it comes to also listening, I can say, for instance, when I want giving women to, let's say, for instance, to listen to me, I'll come to them and tell them I'm going through this and this and this, and it will be up, and I need this kind of support. With hearing, they can just say, yes, Amisa, we've heard you, we'll look for a solution. But when you're talking about listening, it will be, yes, Amisa, so we've listened to what you've said, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4 ways in which you can be able to talk about it. And that brings collaboration, and that brings trust, because I cannot trust you. Think about our normal relationship. We can't trust people just because we've had them speaking on the radio. We trust people because we found the foundation of them listening, understanding, and then trusting. And that is what we lead to a trusting relationship. And with a trusting relationship, you are able to talk even into the hard conversation that is usually avoided between the grantees and funders, and be able to come up with even the local solutions and find ways to educate each other, share experiences, and just know it is not just a transactional relationship where I'm giving you money to implement a project, but it is a holistic form of growth where I want, yes, I'm supporting you, but I'm seeing you growth and transitioning and achieving more at the community level. So it is more also about quality work, and rather than quantitative work.
Thank you. Several very important points, and I am completely lost which one to go with, so I'm just going to pick one. You talked about accountability, and funders talk about accountability a lot. You actually expanded it to talk about accountability both ways, accountability of funders and accountability of partners. And one of the traditional accountability mechanisms funders have is MEL, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I hate MEL with a passion. It's like I am the anti-MEL evangelist. I think there are other ways that we can be accountable to each other differently. But so I want to ask first, Muriel, to tell us, how do you in Cartier understand accountability? Yeah, I'll start with you. Can you talk to us about how you understand accountability? And then I'm going to go to Danny.
Yes, thanks a lot, Amisa and Katarina. And I have to admit one thing. I used to be a great fan of MEL and logical frameworks and work plans and everything. I mean, I used to love that, and I changed, and I hope I'll continue to evolve with my thinking on that. No, let me put one thing very clearly. I think that measurement actually reflects values, and it's our role as funder to try our maximum to do our very best to ensure that we recognize, we value, and we understand the partner's indicators. If we need to co-create something, it makes sense. We can work through that. But one of the things that's definitely a nightmare for me is when an organization or a potential partner comes to us and say, what would you like us to measure? And I'm like, I'm not going to decide for you. And if you don't know yourself what you do want to measure to actually assess your social impact, it's not going to work. We need to ensure that what's going to be measured reflect the value of the partner, is concrete enough, so it can be qualitative, it can be quantitative. I mean, we have a huge amount of tools and methodologies we can use, but it has to be concrete enough to demonstrate social change. But we all know it's complex, we all know it takes time. So I think our role is to ensure we are accountable vis-a-vis our board, vis-a-vis our colleagues, vis-a-vis our partners, vis-a-vis our teams. I think it's a very important topic, accountability, but it doesn't mean that you should put the burden on your partners. I mean, you have to get rid of the arduous application processes and reporting that are based on your template and not respecting the templates that are used by the organization, not respect the calendars of reporting. I mean, we saw that a lot, having organization, having one staff fully dedicated to repackage the same information to 10 different templates because they have 10 different vendors. It's not a good use of time and energy. So that's really something I think we collectively have to work on. And finally, and then I stop here, is really to create space for grantees to tell us about their impact in their own world. And then obviously it's a discussion. I mean, if we decide collectively, I mean, to engage in a partnership, we both win a partnership. I mean, it's not a grantee that's, winning money. It's not, it's really about building that partnership. So yeah, I think the meal issue is a very tangible and concrete way of translating, what we just talked about, power relation and trust. How do you actually work on that with your partners?
Thanks, Mira. We've got a question or a comment from Melissa Pitoti in the chat box that I want to build off a bit, because Melissa's talking about, the risk sometimes that a trust-based relationship is about mitigating risk. But traditional funders often consider that, for example, funding frontline small women's organizations is risky. So, Danny, can you just talk to us, how do you think as a funder, because you sit on both sides, you receive funds, so you have to report to somebody, but you also are a funder. What are the practical ways that you think donors can be better at disrupting this concept of risk, or how could we see risk differently?
So great question. Three sort of part answers, or three reflections on some from practice at Oxfam, I think. One is, I think Amisa said it, and a couple of the other comments have already made, and Muriel just said it, which is start by listening to what the people or partners you're working with or funding, if you're a grant maker, what they want to achieve. And again, with the longer horizon, the better. Whereas the traditional approach is we've got our risk matrix or our risk report or whatever we do, and we impose it on other people. We put others through our risk frameworks. Whereas I think what everyone so far has said is invert that, like disrupt it. Say, if you really want to back a partner, go and think with them about what they want to achieve. Think about how they're managing risk and assurance, because that's going to be just as important to them as it is to you. And then, retrofit or complement how you then approach that. I think that's one lesson we're learning. A second is, and you hinted at it earlier, Katerina, which is the sort of this idea that, those of us who are in social justice or social change or whatever, we're not delivering widgets. We're not in a manufacturing business with inputs here and outputs here and trying to build a most efficient sort of supply chain. This isn't the science of delivery. This is the art of transformation. And if you believe it's the art of transformation, then you've got to let go of some of those traditional methods that we bring from the world of commerce or the world of public service and sort of delivery-oriented science-based systems. I'm not saying there's no room for it, but in some ways, I think the log frame has killed or has dampened spark and innovation and radical thought and behaviors in civil society. And we've ended up sort of instrumentalizing and bureaucratizing bits of civil society that should be ripping all that stuff up and challenging us and doing things differently. And so I think, and talking to our boards or our key stakeholders about all of that and being prepared to, it's sort of like a Dutch colleague of mine says that when she hears the word risk appetite, I don't speak Dutch, but she says risk appetite to them, to a Dutch speaker, sounds like you're going to eat the risk when you translate it. And I think that's sort of true, right? We want people to, if we're to be successful as an ecosystem, we want those who can digest risk to be able to eat it. It's not to sort of pass it on to other people. It's not a hot potato that you grab and go, "Ooh, you have it." It's saying, I have the resilience and the digestive system to be able to absorb this risk. So I'm going to eat this risk on our, on our collective behalf. But I need you to share in this and do that. And I think that's the sort of third lesson, I suppose, which is, can you think about in risk in very different way? For me, I'm coming to the end of 5 years at Oxfam. I'm moving to a new role at the end of the year. And the risk that keeps me up at night at the moment is the risk of failure on so many of the progressive agendas that most of us probably on this call work on. Those of us who are interested in environmental sustainability, the planet is burning. Those of us interested in gender justice, we're going backwards on so many things, right? And so that's the overwhelming risk that I worry about. And yet the sort of traditional risk and MEL and accountability systems we go sort of take us further away from that, right? It's coming back, compartmentalizes us and divides us up into projects and bits. And I sometimes spend time with our board talking about that. We've been in this business for 81 years, but it feels like we're going backwards. So what does this new approach look like? Or what's our role in testing new approaches that will hopefully make the world a radically better place? Thanks.
So, Amisa, I want to come to you now because there's a couple of great comments in the chat box about what risk really is. And Danny just said we need to retrofit risk. But Amisa, tell us, what's the risk if we don't fund and support frontline women's organizations like yours? Because for me, I think that Sonia is right. We think of risk from the wrong, as funders, we think of risk from the wrong side. Isn't the real risk that if we don't support organizations like yours, or what are the risks if we don't? Can you talk to us about that?
Thank you. And thank you, Danny, for the important points that you mentioned. So when you're talking about risk, currently in Kenya, there is overtaxing of citizens. I can give an example. And overtaxing of citizens, that means that almost a quarter or closely to a half of an employee's salary or somebody that you're working with goes to the tax to the government. Now, as a woman who supports, runs a nonprofit, and I'm supporting also young women who are actually working within the organization, that is one of the risks, because I know that if I'm not able to compensate for these young people who are working with, let's say, Nivishe Foundation, that means that our work won't be able to continue. That means that we are also going, just what Danny said, we've made like some progress when it comes to mental health at the community level, and now we have to retrogress and go back because there's nobody who will be playing the role that we are playing. I'm not saying that we are the savior and that if you are not there, nobody will be able to do, but we also understand the importance of the work we do, and we know that it is very crucial to the extent that if those things are not looked into, they lead to like the society that you're working with to go back to where it was before. And for a funder, that may not be a risk, but that is a risk to us because let's say if it is a funder, they will give you the money and tell you there's no process of, because there's that power dynamic. I'm not able to go and say, okay, in Kenya, like this is the current financial situation. We need to really focus to work on increasing salary, especially when it is restricted funding. So that is a problem that I have to deal with. But from the other end of the funder, their money has to be protected and it cannot just go to paying salaries or other operation costs, it has to go to the program. So it also goes back to when we're talking about risk, it's also going to understanding the terminologies that we are using when defining these words. What is risk? Because what is risk at the grassroots level may not be risk at somebody who is working at an international level, who are basically maybe doing the same project or who are doing the same work. So it is very important to look into that. And one way that I usually see to look into the aspect of risk is intentional involving these grassroots people that you're serving be part of your boards. Like if you're having a non-profit and you have the board of trustees or the board of directors, have these people that you're serving, because most of the time I sit in several boards, they select people who can bring something to the table and help navigate the organization. But we tend to forget that as a grassroots person, women-led organization, they have to have a seat at the table, not for the sake of tokenism, just to tick a box, but so that you can be able to understand these small issues that are happening at the grassroots levels that are hard to be understood at the boardroom level. And that is where most of the decisions that are made when it comes to funding this local nonprofits. Or can we have like these people? And that will also help to mitigate the risk, because if I'm in a board, let's say I'm in a board with the Oak Foundation, I can be able to tell Katarina that this is what is happening to the people you are supporting in this part of sub-Saharan Africa. So can you be able to look into it, or how can we come with a collaborative decision for it? So those are the two dynamics when it comes to risk. And I understand it is important to look into it, but it's different. It has a lot of perspective when we are talking about risk.
Thanks, Amisa. That's a great point. Can I just ask for a show of hands of any of you who belong to an organization? Do you have program participants or constituent populations or people who benefit from the work that you do on your boards? Hands up, anybody. It's a really cool point, isn't it? So we've got a couple. Yeah. I can see Melissa. Yeah, okay. So I used to work with Melissa, so I know that one. Yes. Any ones that Katarina has no idea about? Oh, here we go. Takani, okay. Yeah, so there's a few, but not very many. Look how many of us there are on this screen. And Amisa's made a very simple point about how do we move further in our relationship with trust? How do we take that step further in disrupting or retrofitting risk? How do we be part of this art of transformation in ways that are very real for frontline activists? And here's a pretty simple, obvious one, and yet the number of hands is pretty small. So I think that also says something about our comfort with this power dynamic and giving up power from a funder's perspective or from an organizational perspective. I think we're not even close. And this idea of long-term flexible core funding as being a kind of an antidote or addressing that power isn't even the beginning of it. So it's a great point. So thank you, Amisa. I also can I come back to you again, Amisa, and ask you about accountability, because Muriel spoke about accountability, you've spoken about accountability, and we often think of it as holding partners to account. What do you need from us as funders to hold us to account? How would you, as a frontline activist leader, hold us to account?
Okay, thank you, Katarina. When it comes to accountability, again, like risk, it has the two dimensions, and both totally make sense. Because if you are coming from the funder's perspective, you will understand the concept of accountability, and you'll also understand the concept of accountability from our perspective. And I just wanted to give an example of, imagine working in a community whereby the funder has to hold you accountable because of the M&E system, which I'm glad to hear that most of us are not fond of. And some of the people that we work with at the community level have disabilities, maybe hearing, and they require more support to be able to be listened to, and especially to see if the programs that we are doing have impact of them. So that means it is an extra amount of resources that is needed, resources time-wise, commitment-wise, to make sure that we are inclusive at any point and make sure that their point is taken. But us at the grassroots level, we are able to know that that is a challenge, but we cannot be able to go and tell a funder or somebody supporting us that we were not able to meet this M&E thing because some of our beneficiaries have issues and it required extra support to be able to actually record or to put down how the program has impacted them. Or maybe these people are actually working for us and they're from the community, people with disabilities. So how are we going to make sure that will be my problem as a grassroots leader, but that is not a problem that a funder is able to look into. And so that is also what, when we're talking about accountability, that brings to my head that if I'm holding you accountable, if you're holding me accountable to use your resources well, I also have to hold you accountable to be able to make sure that we are working collaboratively so that you can make my process of being held accountable very, very easy. So it is not just to do this, fill this as part of the policies, but if in case we have some challenges, how can we be able to bring and talk about these challenges, and how can you also be able to support us when it comes to that? Another point that I wanted to talk when it comes to holding each or having, when it comes to accountability, is the prospect of first of all, what is accountability? Especially, what does accountability mean to the grassroots level? Because with accountability, that means there are frameworks to work with. And when you're talking about frameworks, that means that we are expecting somebody at the grassroots level, because of the formalities, to find ways to be able to learn instead of finding ways to make this process easier for somebody who have informal education to be able to adjust to this way of working with us, we are making it either harder because of the formalities. So how can we also be able to break the formalities when it comes to accountability? How can we be able to build the relationship so that when you're holding me accountable and accountability is also conversation, because I can have a conversation with Danny, let's say, and we talk about this program and this is where we are going and what you are able to do about it. Conversation is also part of accountability. So how can we break these big words and the frameworks and the formalities to simple things like conversation, so that it can have that crucial impact to the people who are working at the grassroots level to bring that necessary change?
So I'm going to throw that back to you, Danny, since Amisa kind of mentioned you there. I think those are really critical points, and a little bit goes back to my idea earlier about how do we listen, and how this translation concept of, how do we translate the realities of what's happening on the ground to being able to work with that as funders. So I suppose a very real example right now, Danny, is you're talking about your colleagues in Gaza and organizations that you fund in Gaza, who right now can't in any way meet any kind of risk or accountability or any kind of table or whatever to report, because they're trying to stay alive. So what do you do as a funder to give them the space to do what they need to do right now at a moment when perhaps transformation is possible despite these horrors? So what do we as a funder do in that moment?
So I suppose that's one difference between the INGO that's acting as a fund intermediary or a funder versus, say, traditional philanthropists, because I think what we bring to the table, particularly advocacy led INGOs like Oxfam, as in Oxfam, a core part of what we do as Oxfam is global advocacy, and in trying to influence and shift policies and achieve systemic change. And I say that's one difference because when, those colleagues in Gaza and those partners in Gaza that we have heard from in the last few weeks, and, they check in occasionally when there's enough power to power up their batteries on their phones, or will send us a voice note. And, some of those are terrifying, as you can imagine, but all of them ask for only one thing from us as Oxfam GB colleagues or in the global north, and that's for advocacy to de-escalate hostilities, that they're worried about the sort of cycle of violence that they're, the innocent victims of, and they're worried that this cycle of violence is only going to get worse and it's going to have more dramatic impacts, not just in Israel and Palestine, but maybe even the whole region. And so it's been quite moving to hear that clear call from us. Like they're saying, do whatever you can to put pressure on every prime minister, president, foreign office, whatever, to bring, a ceasefire, release of hostages, immediate humanitarian access. And so, it's been, as you say, sort of suspending normal rules and trying to use what we bring. Now, if you're the Cartier Foundation, that's not going to be the same, but maybe there are other ways that you might be able to step in and support those partners in rebuilding their lives and livelihoods and homes and buildings and things like that. So it's a sort of extended duty of care. It comes back to sort of the my people point that I was trying to make. And maybe another observation, just building on something that Amisa said that resonated with me, which is, if in the conversation that Amisa and I might have, we might say, well, Danny holds some resource and Amisa wants it, and we can design a relationship and some forms and an agreement that will allow us to conduct business or a transaction or whatever, and we can make it as thoughtful, as flexible, as long-term as possible. But I think we also should question the fact that my role in this, right? I'm a steward of someone else's money. And I would argue that I would take a bet that every one of us on this call is a steward of someone else's money, right? Even the so-called high net wealth individual. I was hosting a panel recently with Marlene Engelhorn, who's inherited a huge amount of wealth. She's only very young and hates it and wants to disrupt traditional philanthropy. And she makes this fabulous point that there is no one in the planet who is a self-made billionaire or millionaire or whatever, right? They might be entrepreneurial and hugely successful and inventive and creative, but they have wealth because they've been able to rely on society, because of the public services that are offered, or the labor, or the unpaid care offered by women and girls in their communities, or whatever else it is. And so we are social animals who are, whether we like it or not, part of communities. And then some of us work in philanthropy, some of us, like me, steward the resources of, in our case, in the UK, we have 267,000 regular donors who give us a donation every month. The most common profession of an Oxfam donor in the UK is a teacher, who don't earn a lot of money, but they give, a monthly donation because they believe in compassion and solidarity. And so when I speak to Amisa in that relationship, I think it's just as important that I'm aware of the fact of my role and my privilege and the power that I hold, but also the responsibility and accountability that I have to those other people and everyone, whether you're the person who made the money, the person who's helping them spend the money, the person who's in the INGO who's acting as an intermediary, whether you're even, in some ways, Amisa, who might work for the NGO, working with the communities she's working with. All of us are in this sort of mutual chain of accountability. And yet, if you look at our papers and our annual reports and it feels like we're all isolated actors who are celebrating our own greatness, right? And so, you read our annual report, look at how many people we helped this year and how many grants we gave out and whatever. And little recognition that we are fundamental, we're cogs in this sort of incredibly complicated system. And until we pay sufficient attention to that, I think we won't solve or make progress on the accountability challenge.
I'm aware that we've got 15 minutes. Shall we ask people from the group if you have questions that you would like us to raise? There's one, sorry. Did you just, Melissa, did you have a question or did you?
Or people who have put them in the chat box can ask them if they want to.
I don't see any hands up. I did see Melissa vaguely with a hand up, but then it disappeared. Was that a mistake? Was that a button?
I was cheering. My hands
Oh,
are
you were cheering. Okay, cheering. Hurrah. Okay, here we've got one up here. Sorry, Smita.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Katrina, Atlanti, Danny, Muriel. This has been absolutely enlightening. I just want to briefly talk about what we do. We're a woman-led organization, and we're empowering women with financial independence. And all the, it's more of a reflection. I absolutely loved what Muriel said about flexibility and being transparent. And the fact that we also need to be measurable and sustainable to have impact. And thank you, Danny, for being, the sentence of being the steward of someone else's wealth. My reflection on this was mainly that not just are we the steward of someone else's wealth, but then if I'm running an organization, I need to ensure that whatever impact we are having is not just long-term, but that it is sustainable, it is measurable. And then I also need to understand how we're going to work with our donors to bring that impact forward. So that collective impact that we have with not just our funders and not just us as the organization, but also our students. What is that collective impact that we're talking about? And I think what Amisa mentioned about, actively listening and how funders need to listen to us. But I think at the same time, as an organization, we have also a similar duty to the funders to make sure that we are delivering also. So it's really, it's perfectly put by Danny when he said we're all cogs of that same wheel, and we really need to work together to understand each other better. So thank you for this. It's been really fantastic. I just wanted to bring up this reflection. Thank you.
Thanks, Mita. Thank you. I can't see any more questions, so I have tons. So, and so if you don't mind, I have one more, another question for Amisa, actually. So Danny talked about suspending the rules because in this current Gaza situation. At Oak, during the COVID crisis, we suspended the rules. It was whoever's got money from us, do what you want, as you want, when you want, report when you want, how you want. It all went out the window from the rules perspective. And nothing terrible happened. And yet, once COVID was over, we fell back into our rules. And my point at Oak was, but if we didn't need them and nothing terrible happened when we just abandoned them, why have we reimposed all of these processes back on our partners? It doesn't make any sense. So, Amisa, I want to ask you, if you could rewrite the rules for engagement between partners and funders, what would be the top 2 non-rules that you would give us?
I love that question, Katarina. So I'm just thinking the 2 non-rules that I would want to. Number 1, productivity versus just showing up to the work. Because with Nivishe Foundation, we are youth-led actually. We are women-led, and we have people with lived mental health experiences working with us. So we're actually serving the community with people who are from the community and have experienced similar challenges from the community. So for us, we have to throw a lot of rules that a lot of nonprofits operate with, because if I'm dealing with somebody with lived experiences, that means that, let's say if I'm dealing with somebody who has ADHD, which is a neurodevelopmental disorder, so that means that I have to find ways in which I can accommodate them and also hold them accountable while supporting them at the same time. If I'm working with women at the grassroots level, I have to understand that women at the grassroots levels are the main breadwinners. So whatever comes, whatever the false sunshine comes, whichever way, the money expected from them. So my role is to make sure that these people are financially supported. And women go through several phases. So sometimes women go through the reproductive cycle, women give birth. So for us, I have to make sure that even our policies are very friendly, completely, especially to women that we are working with, so that even when we are looking at the report, I'm able to say, yes, I was not able to develop this part because I was having like bad menstrual cramps, but I did it at my own timing and I delivered. So one thing that is really working for me at Nivishe Foundation is putting people first. And when I'm talking about putting people first, it's not a cliche, but just knowing that with my team members, with women, I'm actually prioritizing these women so that they can actually work better for the community. I've gone through several trials and errors, but I'm still learning on how I can be able to better myself at. The second one I would want to throw away, of course, is restricted funding. And I totally understand the need for unrestricted funding when it comes from the funders dynamic, because each organization has their own value system and their own. So if you're giving me money, I need to do it according to what your expectation is. But for the grassroots organization that I've seen working and really, really doing the work, we really need to consider the aspect of long-term unrestricted funding, not just one time, long-term, and then it is just not me giving you unrestricted funding, but me working with you to make sure even after the period that I've supported you, let's say for 5 years or so, I'm leaving you at a better place to be able to secure other fundings and not at a crippled place where I found you or where you are. So it should be more of an empowering relationship and less of a crippling relationship. And that also calls for accountability at the end of the day. So it cycles back to it. So my two things will be unrestricted funding with accountability, of course, what we've talked about, and also having policies that are less stringent and more informal so that people can work and give their best at the organization.
Right, thank you. That's it.
Katerina, if I may,
Please.
Just a quick comment, because I really like when you mentioned COVID and what it changed for you. Actually, it changed basically most of our funding strategy. I mean, we were already focusing a lot on social impact, but in terms of how do we support our grantees? I mean, before COVID, I would say that less than 5% of our funding was unrestricted. Our board would have been extremely reluctant. We did the same. So I think it was, I hope, a common funder perspective to say we have to collaboratively go through that. We don't know how long it will take. We don't know what's coming. It's a world of unknown. So same, unrestricted money, no reporting dates, just keep us informed, tell us how we can do more, how we can help. But I usually say that we gained maybe 5 years in our foundation journey through that responsible funding practices by going through that and realizing first, nothing terrible happened in terms of funding. I'm talking about, not about the global situation. Nothing terrible happened. Actually, our partners, they went through that and they created, they were innovative, they came with solutions, they came with new needs, and we thought like, okay, why don't we continue like that? And I think that sometimes very good things can also happen from that. I'm glad that we did not get back to where we were, and that not only the team, but our board, and I can see within our own funders ecosystem that it starts to be agreed as good practice. I agree with your point, Katerina. It's just the first step. We have to be pragmatic, but we also have to be humble and self-aware. But the fact that sometimes you have to just release and just let the rules go and say, okay, maybe I can learn from that and build on that, which I think it's what happened to us. And yeah, as I said, I think we gained 5 years of discussion by just releasing the rules like that.
Yep. So we have a question from Eliana.
Okay, at the risk of being really unpopular here, I'm just going to say, so I have a perspective on monitoring and on log frames, which I mean, particularly for small organizations, which I'd like to just put out there as for reflection. Our experience has been at IF Foundation, where I work, has been that we still use the old log frames and theory of change and all this, and financial accountability as well. And the reason we are still doing it, and as much as we'd like to move to more unrestricted funding, the reason we're still doing it, particularly with younger organizations, is that we think that the discussions that we can have by being very precise about or not what we expect, but more what the organizations themselves expect from the work that they're doing, like really pulling that string right the way through from, the idea to the action to what they're expecting to see in, for this population that we're all concerned to affect. Really pushing to have that that visibility for them is really why, for me, why we do it. So in a way, I feel uncomfortable sometimes in a first instance working with a small organization who perhaps doesn't have the habit of using that really of that discipline. I mean, this is sounding very Cartesian and very whatever. But I think that it sometimes enables them to think, and for us to think together about really where we're going. And I find that there's often organizations who are doing exceptional work, but not necessarily focused on what is the change that they want to achieve. And sometimes if we're not precise about what we're expecting, like for them, what they expect for themselves, then we can sometimes lose something. And so I just thought I'd put it out there at the risk of being very unpopular, because I know it's heavy, but I think there's also a learning curve with it, which is useful. The flip side of it, of course, is that change is complicated using these kinds of tools, and that's problematic. But I think the positive side is the learnings are more enabled through really a very precise idea of what it is that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you. So Amisa, you look like you want to respond, so I'm going to go straight.
I'm sure.
Yeah, I actually resonated well with what Eliana was saying, and that's why I insisted there's the need for conversation and adding to what Danny had said, because starting even as a grassroots organization, we are not usually perfect. Like, we keep on reiterating, reinventing, like trying to build, and each time we continue, like let's say in our space of mental health, each and every time there are new mental health things that needs to be talked about. And for us, we did not, like, even to reach where we are today, we had to work with funders who are willing to say, okay, we are going to support you, but we'll work first with providing you internal structures and system strengthening and strengthen all your infrastructures at the organization. Because at that time, we did not even, like, if you ask me, we recently, this year is when we launched our strategic plan for 2023 to 2027. And we could not have done it if we did not have a funder who said, okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm investing for you guys to have like the best, to develop a strategic plan, to focus your goals, to like look into your programs. Are they really what is needed? Can you be able to change them in these 5 years? Can you like have a specific goal for the next 5 years? And unfortunately, a lot of grassroots organizations lack that. So this is also, from what Elena is saying, that this is also a call to all the funders that supporting grassroots organizations, just apart from offering us finances, it's also important to make sure that the systems are well. So it is also, and this also is tricky because we are not expecting like funders to come and say, I want to, your system has to be, can I help you with your system? That is not their work, or we've made it that it is not their work, but it is now intentional calling them. Like a lot of organizations, for us to thrive at the grassroots level, we don't have this system. And with your help, we can be able to build this system and be able to grow. So how can you also support, apart from the funding, how can you also support in system strengthening and different aspects? So just to be able to know that we are on the right track, we know what we want, and this is how we are going to achieve it.
If I may, thanks Eliana and Amisa, and I see also great comments on the chat regarding mail and all the tools that we use. One of the things we noticed is that for grassroots organization, but not only, sometimes it's difficult to either have the resources to engage with an expert on M&E, but even if you have the resources to convince your board that it's worth investing in working with consultants. And what we have decided to do a couple of years ago, and we hope to expand that in the upcoming years, is to work with ID Insight, Mighty Ally, Appleseed. We have partnership directly with those consultancy firm, and they provide support to our grantees, obviously based on a process we exchange, we identified collectively the needs, but we really see that also as a role that funder can play. I mean, we definitely do not pretend to have that set of expertise, but if we can connect and pay for this support, we really see that as a value, because I see your point, Eliana, a good theory of change. Amisa, as you mentioned, a wisely constructed strategic plan, it's very important, not just for the grantee funders relationship, but really for the organization to structure what do I want to achieve and how. But we also know that, you know, getting a couple of hours of support is expensive. So can we funders play a role? I think yes, and this is something that we try to do and to expand.
Thanks, Mira. I'm just very aware of the time, and we're 1 minute over, and Helen had a question, so I'm really sorry I'm not going to go to you, Helen, but you can write to any of us and we will answer your question because I don't want to take us over time since you've all given so generously of your time, but I do want for Amisa. Have we lost her again? Are you there, Amisa?
Yes.
Yes, there you are. Sorry. So, Amisa, I'm going to leave you with the last word. Can you tell us if there's one thing that came out of the report or this discussion that you would like us as funders to take away? What is the one most important thing for you?
The one most important thing for me is intentionality in involving grassroots organization. So even when we are developing the reports, even when we are coming up with researches, even when we are coming up with programs supporting organization, are we going to be really intentional to support these organizations? And we've talked about different types of support that I won't go deep into, but
did we lose that? Okay, we're going to take intentionality. We're sorry that we lost you, Amisa. So we're going to be intentional about our conversations with our partners. So I want to thank you all very much, especially Amisa, Muriel and Danny for joining us. Thank you all of you for joining us from near and far. It's been a great pleasure to have you. You know how to be in touch with us. You can write to us if you have further questions. I did want to finish on one note. The name of the report is A Leap of Faith. When I was a young person, which is a very long time ago, my father used to, and I was nervous, my father used to say that when you come to the edge, to the precipice, and you look over the edge, it's only when you leap, that you take that leap of faith, that you learn that you can fly. That's actually paraphrasing the French philosopher Apollinaire, which is disappointing because I thought it was my dad who made it up. But anyway, but the point is, I think all of us are here because of our intention to support and enable those women's organizations to take that leap and to fly and to soar, because I believe the solutions to all of the difficult and interconnected problems of today lie in their hands and within their competence and expertise. So thank you all. It's been a great pleasure. Atalante?
I would like to thank Katerina for moderating this, as always, in an incredibly human, respectful, enlightening, humorous way. I think from where we sit at Giving Women, it's one of the things that we say, that we try not to have that dimension of power because we do not give money. But one of the things, and it's been my mantra this year, because every year I'm a very simple soul, I have a mantra. And my mantra has been, we need to listen. We need to listen to the grassroots organizations to really understand what it is they're doing. At the same time, and I really do buy into what Eliana has just said, that often I think there is a need for some structuring and understanding. And I think one of the things we keep and we do use these tools, is that we constantly have to keep back and say, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Why have you set up this organization? What is the goal? What is your community going to look like when you're out of business? And I think those are the kind of questions, if we keep asking those kind of questions, we're going to help to structure. And I think we have had experience, because we work with a lot of grassroots organizations, and we recognize that these organizations, I saw Lucy was on, and they're doing the most amazing work, but sometimes that work is reacting and we lose where we're actually trying to go. And I think that where we can help, I think as grantors, or as Giving Women, as mentors, supporters, whatever, is to help to guide their intentionality. And I think that kind of brings it all together for me. So this has been, for me, as always, an incredible learning experience. And I'd like to thank Katerina, Danny, Muriel, and most of all, our wonderful Amisa. So thank you so much, and all of you for giving us your time this afternoon. Thank you so much.